Hey, welcome everybody. My name is Mark. Thanks for being here today in the forum with me. I'm wearing a snazzy shirt. This is a traditional batik shirt from Malaysia, where I spent 6 years living with my family. And so, in today's episode, it turns out this is going to be part one of a three-part series where I talk about the four lessons that I learned from living in Malaysia for 6 years in Southeast Asia. It radically changed my life in a huge way. I learned a ton of things from it, and it just became too long. So I had to splice it up into three separate parts. This intro is being recorded at a later time. And now when I look back, this has become a series of videos of me just processing and thinking out and sharing with you my thoughts on diversity. I'm a white guy, and thinking about the world of diversity, it's impacted my life in a tremendous way, my marriage in a profound way, and yeah, and I'm so happy because of it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to you experiencing these series of talks. So today is episode one of these four lessons that I learned in Malaysia. Thanks again. Yesterday, I left off on the story of when I was in college. And my time in university was really significant for me because this is actually the place where I met my wife. You know, having traveled so much throughout my adolescence, when it created this really big interest in just people that had other international experiences. And so I had a lot of interest in the international students at my school. So I spent a lot of time with them, became friends with them, and ended up marrying one of them. My wife, Alicia, is Chinese Malaysian, which means she is ethnically Chinese, but nationally, she's from Malaysia. And so she's a minority in her own country. And this woman that I met, she was just so mysterious. Her being from another culture, well, the mystery comes partly also because, she's a woman and I'm not. But there was so much about her that I didn't understand, but that I was drawn to. And I saw her being a woman that was just incredibly endearing with other people. She was kind and compassionate. She loved Jesus deeply, and she was the most beautiful woman that I'd ever seen. And so we got married right after college, and we moved to Wisconsin for a few years. But in my mind, I always entertained the idea of moving back to Malaysia and being able to spend some time there. Part of a primary reason of this is because when I married my wife, I understood a bit about who she was and the cultural background that she had that made her who she was, but there was a lot that I didn't understand. And so it still remained a mystery to me. And so what I wanted to have is I wanted for our future kids to grow up in a home that embraced both of our cultures. Part of my experience living, having been to so many countries, and at this point in my life, I've been to 40 of them. For some, that's pales in comparison of the type of travel that they've been able to do. For others, it's way beyond them. But in those 40 countries that I've been able to visit and to be a part of, it's enriched my life in an incredible way. And so the cultural differences that she had were something that were significant, but I wasn't even able to identify all of what those things were. And so to integrate this into our household, I found it. My fear was that we were going to live in this house where we had it was really a Caucasian American experience for my kids, and that's not something that I wanted. You know, I think Chinese are very interesting. It's because their cultural nuances have always had been up until that point very difficult for me to identify. Right, my first impression of Chinese at that time was that they were private, they were quiet, incredibly accommodating of others, and they take their shoes off at the door. Right, that was my first impression, and so that first impression even went into our marriage, not knowing not knowing what made my wife who she was. And I knew that was going to be the case for most of our life together, and I would never truly fully understand who she was unless we were able to move there. And so we did. There was many different purposes of moving to Malaysia, but one of the primary drivers of that was so that we could move there and I could understand the background that she came from. I was up for an adventure. There was business opportunities there, but a driving force was knowing my wife more and being able to create a home eventually that was really able to embrace the most wonderful aspects from both of our cultures. And to be able to do that, we had to first identify what those things were. So I thought moving there would be really easy. I had traveled so much in my life. I had studied in Europe, and so I lived there for 5 months, and I thought I had it. You know, but what ended up being a real surprise to me was actually how challenging my time there initially was. When you visit a place, you can put up with people's annoyances. You can push past the things that you don't understand. But when you move to a place, when you move somewhere and you try to integrate into that culture, you can't run away from those differences or those irritations that swell up. And so um, I had a really hard time acclimating. And partly also is because there was no end time to our time there. We ended up being there for 6 years, which, in my opinion, is a really long time. But we were actually open minded of moving and possibly even relocating there because of the various opportunities that we had. So when I lived in Malaysia, I became friends with a number of expatriates. And these are Americans and Europeans that were living there, but their lives were actually just microcosms of their home country, but in their house. They ate the same food that they would eat at home in their home country. They watched the same type of entertainment, and I would think if I was in their similar circumstance, I would be doing the exact same thing. But being married to a local, I was fully into the Malaysian culture. I lived with my mother-in-law, and my wife's sisters were neighbors to us. And so my mother-in-law also had 11 brothers and sisters. And so her family was constantly over, and it was just it was a wonderful thing. But we just had a lot of Malaysians present in my life. I ate rice or noodles for lunch and dinner every day. Where I went to work, and I was the only Caucasian that worked there. And so my days were fully immersed in the culture. And my life was entirely different. Even my wife became a different person when we moved back there. I actually had to, it was actually really difficult because my wife had acclimated and changed, adjusted who she was to be able to fit in American culture better. And I suppose some of it by moving back and being in the house with her mom, some of that is going to be a little bit of regression back to our childhood, but it didn't change. I had to realize that I think this woman who has changed her accent from the way that I knew her speaking English, the way she interacts with me also has changed. The way she interacts with people has changed. And I don't know if I like it because this is not really the woman that I initially married. But being a Christian, being committed to the idea of marriage, and knowing that I wasn't going to back out of that, I had to press through it, and it was actually a major adjustment for me to go through. So I had a hard time making sense of it all. I knew, though, 6 months into it, that I had begun acclimating to Malaysian culture just a little bit. We lived in a high-rise condominium complex, and so we were on the 40th floor, and we would wait for that elevator to come up, and it was an open air. Mind you, Malaysia is in between Thailand and Singapore in Southeast Asia, and in there it's 90 degrees and 90% humidity almost every day of the year. This is because they're 4 degrees off the equator. And so it is hot, right? Me coming originally from the upper Midwest, from Wisconsin, I was never really loved the cold, but cooler weather, definitely. Living in 90 degrees with 90% humidity was not my ideal way of living. And so you'd just be sweating all the time. And I remember standing in front of the elevator waiting for it to come up, and you just had left the house, left the air conditioning, and you're standing there in this open air, feeling the heat and how muggy it was, and my back is sweating, and I wasn't angry. And I realized at that moment, wait a second, I'm wet from my own sweat, 5 minutes after, 2 minutes after leaving the house, and I'm not furious right now. Like I've arrived. This is first step into acclimating into culture, and it was actually a big deal to me, as simple as it was. So that was just that was the first step for me to realize, like, okay, I think I'm making some progress and becoming being able to settle in and enjoy my life here a little bit more. But having lived there for 6 years, really my time changed who I really my time there really changed me, and for the better. And so what as I reflect on my time there, and having been lived in a culture that was not my own, with people who were not like me, I wanted to share four of the lessons that I had and I took away, that are four key lessons that have really shaped who I am as an adult. And so I'll share those with you now. First thing is about sharing things. Sharing is caring, right? I grew up in a world where this is mine, that is yours. There's clear delineation between the things that I own and possess and are mine, and the things that are yours. I mean, when I go into this is like pretty typical. You go into a Caucasian American home, and two kids start fighting, and the parent will step in and say, like, daughter, like, whose toy are you playing with? That's not yours, that's your brother's. And so you need to be able to give that up. In our world, even with kids, no child has one toy. Like, all toys that any child has are for all to play with. There is no this is yours and that is theirs. Also, in growing up, the idea of going Dutch is that the Dutch are so cheap. They're so calculative with it, that they with their money, and so careful with their money, that when you go out, you are going to pay for your own meal, and you are going to pay for your meal. And so that's the way my family lived. Even into adulthood, my family goes out. I mean, not as little kids under my parents' roof, but as adults, we'll go out and we will calculate to the dollar how much each person owns. And so the sharing is caring idea was a foreign concept to me. My mother-in-law gave me a car to use during my time there. And so it was a huge blessing. It was just really grateful that I was able to have a car to use. But that car, I would assume, is just my car. Like, that it is. If anybody needed to use the car, I'm sure I would let them use it, but just ask me, right? So I remember I was with somebody, and I walked back home to our place, and I went in the we had a parking garage, and so went to our parking spot, looked, and my car wasn't there. And so I went up to the house and I said, "Hey, has anybody seen my car? Because my car is not where it's supposed to be. It's missing." And then my wife tells me, "Oh yeah, my sister has a friend who needed a vehicle, and so we gave it to her to use." So wait, my sister-in-law's friend needed a car, and we just assumed that we could use it? I mean, I'm sure that I would have. I mean, I guess I probably would have let her use it, this friend of hers, but at least the courtesy to ask. No courtesy, because the mindset there is that, hey, this isn't even your car, by the way. It's your mother-in-law's car, but it doesn't even matter whose car it is, because it's all part of the family. My friend is your friend, and they need it, and of course, if I want to give it to you, of course you'd want to give it to them. So it's not even a question, because it's all of ours together, right? So everything that I ended up owning was actually available for everybody. The refrigerator at my house, I remember there was one point I started writing my name on Ziploc bags and putting food in the refrigerator because I wanted specific things. And whenever I bought things specifically, again, I lived with my family, those things were everything was always gone. So I didn't have even possessions, and the name on the bag didn't even matter. Those things that ended up being used anyway. I think the best example of this idea of sharing is caring, and as petty as this may sound, was about fruit. So in my household, if you got growing up, my mom would cut everything up fairly. Everybody would get their piece, and that was yours to enjoy and not have to share with anybody. So the idea of having like fruit in Malaysia is amazing. I mean, it's the tropics, right? And so these mangoes that we would have in Malaysia were awesome, and were so sweet. And so I would cut up a mango, and I would just my craving of satisfying the desire of enjoying this mango wouldn't be complete until I finished the entire mango. That was just in my head. You eat an apple, you eat an orange, you just eat the whole thing. So that same idea was, I'm going to eat this entire mango. But I remember eating it one time, and my wife just looked at me like, you didn't cut it up to share it with other people? So the way they would do it in my wife's household is they take any sort of fruit and they would cut it up and they would put it into a bowl with a couple forks for the family to share together. And you would eat some of it, but then you'd leave it for the others in the household to eat. Weird concept for me. And I had the hardest time with this because in my mind, I wasn't able to fully satisfy the craving for that fruit unless I was able to eat the entire mango. And this actually took me 3 years, 3 years to work through. But when I finally got to a place where I understood it, is because the enjoyment in eating that fruit isn't that you were able to satisfy that desire, but the fruit is so good that you want to be able to share it with other people. And in fact, your enjoyment of that fruit is magnified because you're able to share that enjoyment with other people. Not just physically sharing, but you were able to have a shared experience with somebody because you shared in that fruit together. And that's what I really understood it. It's we cut up the fruit and we share with other people because, oh my goodness, this is so good. You have to try this. Oh my goodness, I bought some for myself and I bought some for you because you got to share this. And so this idea of having these shared experiences together make that object, the enjoyment of that object, just magnified. And that goes for possessing a car. That goes for anything that we own, especially within the family. Of course, what is mine to share with you, and so you can take it anytime you want because because we're able to enjoy these things together. That was revolutionary for my mind, and to take this independent, you know, personal possession, counting how many things I have, guy that I was, it really released me into this place of giving and generosity to other people. That was just it radically changed the way that I looked at possessions and at things with other people. And we're just going to call that an abrupt ending to part one of this three-part series of the four lessons that I learned from my 6 years in Malaysia. So thanks for being here. This is it's a real joy to have you just be a part of this with me as I sketch out these thoughts and yeah, and share them with you. Have a great night. Thanks. See you tomorrow.